The truck sat in silence at the edge of the coast, its windows fogged by the breath of two restless dogs inside. Just outside, another leash stretched, tight against a rock, the animal at the end of it waiting faithfully in the salt-stained wind. Beyond them, the ocean churned, dark, relentless, and indifferent. The woman who belonged to this scene was gone, as if swallowed by the very landscape she trusted. What could tear a life apart so suddenly, leaving behind only loyal companions and an abandoned vehicle? By the time this story is told, you will have walked through every trace she left, every unanswered question, and the chilling silence that has followed for years. But first we begin here, with this image that refuses to fade.
Alameda rests quietly on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, a city wrapped in calm waters and lined with modest neighborhoods. It feels safe, ordinary, a place where life carries a steady rhythm. Just across the bridges and winding highways, though, the world changes. The pavement ends, the suburbs vanish, and the land rises into untamed cliffs that hold back the Pacific. Point Reyes is beautiful in a way that can feel almost unforgiving. Dense fog rolls in without warning, swallowing trails in minutes. Winds howl through the valleys, tearing across open bluffs. The ocean below crashes against rock with a power that reminds you how fragile a human body really is. For hikers, it's a paradise. Endless trails, wildlife, and panoramic views. But it's also a place where one wrong step can erase you from sight. McClure's Beach lies at the northern edge of this wilderness. It's a narrow cove carved deep into the cliffs, where the sand is hemmed in by jagged rock on both sides. Reaching it means following steep paths down to the shoreline. At low tide, stretches of sand open up, allowing you to walk further along the coast. But as the water rises, the beach disappears. The tide pushes against the cliffs until there's nowhere left to stand. The currents here are notorious, cold, violent, and merciless. This is not a place that forgives mistakes. It lures with its beauty, then reminds anyone who underestimates it that nature always has the last word. And it's against this backdrop that the story begins to unfold.
Catherine Ann Truitt was born on October 11, 1972. To those who knew her, she was simply Cat. She carried herself with a quiet warmth, the kind of presence that made people feel at ease. Standing just over 5 feet tall, with brown hair, hazel eyes, and the faint glint of pierced years, she was unassuming at first glance. But Cat was a woman who carried layers of ambition, of struggle, of resilience. Her early years were fueled by creativity and precision. She trained as a pastry chef at the California Culinary Academy, mastering the kind of patience and artistry that only a steady hand and a passionate heart could bring. But life has a way of shifting course. A serious neck injury, compounded by existing spinal problems, brought her career in the kitchen to a sudden halt. For many, that loss would have been crushing. For Cat, every step on a trail was more than exercise. It was freedom. Out in nature, where the air was sharp and the ground uneven, she found relief that no medication could match. The rhythm of walking gave her both strength and peace. She didn't stop there. Cat redirected her creative energy into new avenues, studying computer graphics, teaching art to children, and always staying connected to the things that gave her life meaning. Her dogs were at the center of it all, loyal companions who joined her on countless walks, their steady presence a comfort through her hardest days. This was the woman behind the name, not just a missing person on paper, but a vibrant, determined soul who had learned to build a full life in the shadow of pain. And it's in knowing who she was
that the weight of what comes next becomes impossible to ignore.
On the morning of January 6, 2010, Catherine Truitt stepped out of the apartment she shared with her roommate in Alameda. It was an ordinary day, the kind that passes without ceremony, yet it would become the last time anyone would see her. The picture of that moment is sharply drawn in memory. Cat dressed in a black windbreaker, layered over an olive green sweater and a white undershirt. Her jeans dark with a faint blue tint, sturdy black keen sneakers laced on her feet. Small, ordinary choices, clothing meant for comfort, for movement, for a day that seemed unremarkable. Her roommate's memory of her that morning is the final image we have, not in motion, not in a rush, but simply leaving, dressed for the chill of January air. There were no words that hinted at anything unusual, no goodbye that felt like it carried more weight than any other. Just the ordinary rhythm of two people sharing a space, one leaving, the other staying behind. It is this quiet normalcy that makes the moment so haunting. The black jacket, the olive sweater, the sneakers, frozen in time, details that carry no meaning on their own, but now serve as the last solid anchor to her presence. Clothing meant for a walk, perhaps, or for an errand, nothing that signaled finality. And yet, that was it, the last domestic glimpse of Cat before she stepped out the door and disappeared from the map of certainty. What follows next would shift her from the safety of the familiar into the shadows of the unknown.
On January 9, 2010, the silence at McClure's Beach was broken by a sight that seemed almost staged, though no one could imagine why. Park rangers came across a tan 2003 Ford Ranger, its bed lined in black, license plate 7C23799. The truck sat parked against the raw sweep of the coast, the kind of place where the ocean never rests and the wind carries the weight of something unfinished. Inside the cab were two of Cat's dogs, waiting, restless but alive. Nearby, tethered to a heavy rock, a third dog stood alone, its leash pulled tight, as though anchored to a scene that made no sense. The tableau was unsettling in its quietness. 3 animals left behind, their owner nowhere in sight. The truck remained there through the night, unmoved, a silent witness to something unseen. By the time it was noted again the following day, nothing about the picture had changed, and yet its strangeness only deepened. A vehicle abandoned at a remote beach, dogs secured but not harmed, no sign of the woman who had driven them there. It was in that still moment that alarm began to take root, because from here, the story no longer looked like a simple walk on the sand. And that unsettling discovery would become the first undeniable clue that something was very wrong. After that discovery, people moved fast. Handlers clipped leashes to collars, boots sank into wet sand, and dogs pushed forward with a single, urgent purpose. Their noses threaded over driftwood and footprints, dipped into seaweed, and followed a faint line through scrub and eroding soil, down toward the shoreline. For a while, the scent held steady, a clear, human trail leading away from the parked vehicle and into the raw edge of the coast. The dogs didn't guess. They read something invisible to us and pulled the searchers in the direction that made sense to them. Then the trail ended. Not in a tangle, not at a piece of clothing, but simply stopped. The dogs hesitated, circled, looked back at their handlers, and could find no further trace. A path that had promised an answer dissolved into silence. There are practical reasons why that happens. The tide eats footprints and drags scent molecules into cold water where they scatter. Wind rips the scent into thin threads and carries them away. Salt and spray coat the ground and mask the subtle chemicals dogs rely on. Rocky ledges and sea caves create baffling air currents. A scent that travels along a path can be swept into a tidal pool or trapped in a fissure where no human can follow. Time is merciless. Every hour the trail weakens. Every footstep from other people blurs the pattern, and a single rain or gust can erase what was once clear. Search teams face more than nature. Some stretches of coast are sheer and unstable, cliffs that are too dangerous to descend without specialized gear. Other coves only open at low tide, a narrow window that can close in minutes. Handlers and rangers must weigh risk to themselves against the chance of finding someone alive. Boats and aircraft can scan from above, but surf and fog hide details. What looks clear from a height can be impossible to reach from shore. Dogs excel where a human can walk, but they lose their edge where water and wind dominate. All these things can turn a promising lead into a dead end. The line of scent that once pointed the way can vanish as if pulled back by the ocean itself, leaving nothing but footprints washed smooth and pockets of sea foam. How could a trail simply stop where answers seem so close? That sudden silence forced investigators to widen their thinking and tighten their options.
The case file that bears Kat's name does not carry the weight of a murder investigation. On paper, it is marked as a lost or injured missing person. That single classification shaped everything that followed. Without confirmed evidence of foul play, investigators could not pursue a homicide case, and without a body, the boundaries of forensic work were painfully limited. The truck she drove that morning was documented, its details logged, its presence undeniable. Yet beyond that vehicle and the dogs left behind, there were no signs of a violent struggle, no bloodstains, no physical evidence pointing to a crime in motion. It was as if the trail had been carefully scrubbed clean before it had even begun. For investigators, this meant working in a space of uncertainty. Every lead hinged on absence rather than presence. Without a body, there could be no autopsy, no cause of death, no proof to push the case into criminal territory. It remained suspended in a gray zone, treated as a missing person, not a victim of foul play. And that distinction mattered, because when a case lives under the category of lost or injured, resources thin out, urgency wanes, and legal pathways narrow. What investigators were left with was a puzzle that could not be solved by science alone. And so the official record stayed fixed in that unresolved status, neither closed nor escalated, leaving only questions that stretched far beyond the reach of paper files. But the silence of official documents never stopped the people who loved Kat from searching for the truth.
Investigators had to balance what could be true with what the evidence would actually allow. The scene and the faint trail left behind forced them into 4 very different lines of thinking, each one plausible in its own way, and each one troubled by the same stubborn gaps. One possibility is that nature simply did what it does best, took hold of a moment and erased it. The coast can fold a person into itself. Hidden ledges, sudden drops, tides that swallow a shoreline as if it never existed. This idea gains weight because the landscape complicates every search. It explains how someone can vanish where a path once seemed clear. But the theory falters against the quiet fact that nothing definitive ever surfaced to confirm it. If the sea or a fall ended her life, why did the ocean and the shore leave almost no trace? That unanswered absence is the hard question this scenario can't escape. There's another, quieter possibility: a sudden medical crisis. A body already worn by pain or injury can fail in an instant, and a brief stumble on uneven ground can become irreversible when you can't steady yourself. This fits the image of someone who used walking as a way to stay steady, someone who could just as easily be felled by a bad turn. What supports this is the simple plausibility of vulnerability. What weakens it is the same problem that haunts the other theories, the lack of physical confirmation beyond the initial scene. Could a single medical emergency, far from help, have turned a familiar route into a fatal trap? Some find it hard to accept that she simply disappeared into the elements, so they consider the possibility of choice, leaving everything behind on purpose. People do vanish and start over, sometimes abruptly. For this to be true, there would usually be signs, plans, messages, deliberate preparation. The idea struggles because the available picture doesn't show those markers. It raises the same emotional barrier for anyone who knew her. Would someone so connected to their life and companions really walk away without a trace? Finally, there is the shadow of foul play. The lack of obvious violence at the immediate scene doesn't rule out an encounter elsewhere. Remote terrain offers spaces where evidence can be hidden or carried off. In some cases, an encounter on a trail can end in a place no searcher ever reaches. This theory is unsettling because it fills the silence with agency, someone else's choice replacing the indifference of nature. Yet without concrete signs to point to a person or motive, it remains a possibility that haunts rather than resolves. Each of these paths points to a different kind of answer, and each one leaves the same ache. What single piece of evidence would have tipped the balance? Next, investigators turned to the only witnesses the scene had left.
The dogs were the only living witnesses to whatever happened that day, and their presence is a detail that has never stopped raising questions. Animals don't speak, but their behavior can sometimes reveal more than words ever could. Investigators had to wonder, what did their conditions suggest about those missing hours? Were they restless, as if something sudden had startled them? Or were they calm, as though they were waiting for an owner who simply hadn't returned yet? These are the kinds of silent clues that shaped the investigation, because animals, tethered and contained, imply intent. It suggests she expected to come back. Yet the fact she never did pushes that expectation into a far darker place. There is also the emotional weight the dogs carried in the story. They were companions, bound by routine and loyalty. To leave them behind, untouched, unharmed, contradicts the idea of a planned disappearance. And for those who knew her, that detail alone spoke volumes. The dogs remained where they had been left, their quiet presence both a comfort and a riddle. Because if they could have told the story, perhaps the mystery would have ended there. But the mystery did not end there. It only grew heavier.
Years have passed, but the absence of answers weighs just as heavily now as it did in those first, uncertain days. Kat's body has never been recovered, and without it, the story remains suspended in a place where grief and uncertainty collide. Families who lose someone to time or illness eventually find a kind of resolution. Here there is only silence, a silence that stretches from the cliffs to the tide, where the ocean has swallowed countless secrets before. For those left behind, the pain is sharpened by not knowing. Did she fall? Was she taken? Or did she slip into some hidden place where no one has thought to look? Each question is a wound that refuses to heal, reopening every time the case resurfaces. What could change this is not mystery or speculation, but something concrete, a new witness stepping forward, a fragment of evidence overlooked, or advances in technology that make it possible to re-examine what once seemed empty. Without these, the case remains a ledger of unanswered questions, a record frozen in time. The weight of that absence is its own story, one that refuses to be put to rest. And from here, the question becomes not just what happened, but what it will take for the truth to finally surface.
The image lingers. A truck parked against the fading coastline, its frame swallowed by dusk, the silence around it heavier than words. Years have passed, yet the question remains. How does someone vanish so completely, leaving only shadows and uncertainty behind? If you know something, anything, no matter how small, it could be the missing piece that brings light to this darkness. Contact local authorities, submit a tip through official cold case channels, and help bring answers to a family that has waited far too long. Because until the truth is found, the story of Kat Truitt is not over.